Over the years, farm tables have become increasingly popular as dining room tables for their simple, primitive design, making them one of my best-selling pieces of furniture and the focus of my business. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how I make the simplest leg I offer, a square tapered leg. Now that I've got my bandsaw, I use it to cut the tapers on my table legs, but before I had it, I used all different types of tools and techniques, and I wanted to go over some of those before I did the demonstration, just so you don't think, oh, I need this big tool to do tapers on large legs like he is. So the earliest way I went about it was using a circular saw. I would cut those tapers with the circular saw just as best I could. Then I would come back in and remove all those saw marks with a draw knife and a hand plane. And that was a pretty good way of going about it, but if you're doing any level of production at all and not just one table or one table every once in a blue moon, it's going to be a pretty slow way of going about it. So the way I was going about it right before I got this bandsaw was using a joiner. The dimension of the legs that I most commonly make a square tapered leg out of is 4 inches square. And it's a rough sawn 4x4, which is actually 4 inches or a little over 4 inches. So I would basically, from the top of that leg, I'd measure down 6 inches and use a square and make a line all the way around that leg, and then freehand a taper onto that piece of wood using the joiner, and that would be on each side. So starting at the bottom, I would just make passes and then lighten that cut up until I got right up to that pencil line, and I would go from 4 inches down to about 2.5 inch square on the bottom. So that was a pretty good way of going about it, but it had its problems as far as having a joiner. The joiner I was using was pretty big. The space it takes up, the danger of using a joiner versus something like a bandsaw. So I much prefer the bandsaw over the joiner. And then if you are doing smaller legs, you don't even need to have these types of tools. You can do it on a table saw, or you can even completely hand plane the taper onto the leg in the case of, say, a 2 inch by 2 inch or 1.5 by 1.5, or just small legs in general. Using a hand plane, a nice cutting hand plane, is also a good option. You can just do layout marks on the stock and plane down to those lines. As far as the material we're going to be using in this video, I want to demonstrate it with material that's easy to get. So what I did is took some 2x6 material and then clamped it up into 3 layers. So they were rough cut to 30 inches long. We're making 29 inch long legs. So I'll overcut them a little bit for any shifting, and I'll cut them to their final length once they are cut down on the bandsaw some. But so the steps is just to glue them up, and the thing you want to do is try to get the straightest boards you can, ones that haven't cupped yet, and then glue them up as soon as possible. So let's go ahead, go to the bandsaw, and make the first cuts. If you're starting out with lumber that is already the correct size for the legs that you're making, you're able just to go ahead and mark out your tapers and cut them. But if you're dealing with lumber that is larger than the final dimension of your table leg like I am, you're going to need to cut it down somehow. I'm going to be doing so on the bandsaw, but you could also use your thickness planer. In a case like this, I'd probably still rough it out on the bandsaw and then finish it off on the planer. But on these particular legs, I like the bandsaw and texture for the distressing process in making the legs, so I'll do it all on the bandsaw. Since I'm dealing with 3 layers of 2x6 material, the dimensions are 5.5 inches by 4.5 inches. So what I do is I set the fence to 4.25 inches first, even though I want a 4-inch leg. Then what I do is I make a cut on two sides that come together in a corner. Then I adjust the fence over to 4 inches and finish off the cut on the opposite 2 sides. This gives me a 4-inch leg with bandsaw texture all around each side. And with the first 2 cuts made on all 4 table legs, I'll now adjust the fence over to 4 inches and make the final 2 cuts on each leg. With those cuts completed on all 4 table legs, I come over to the miter saw, square up one end of the leg, and then cut it to a length of 29 inches. Next up is establishing the lines that you are going to cut your tapers to. For that, you're going to need a pencil, square, a tape measure, and a straight edge. The tapers on these legs start 6 inches from the top and taper down to 2.5 inches at the bottom. So that is 3/4 of an inch from each side at the bottom, and you'll see me mark that in just a second with the pencil. Once these marks are made, you can connect the small marks you've made at the bottom of the legs with the line 6 inches from the top with a straight edge. With the lines drawn, you can cut your tapers out now on the bandsaw. This saw cuts square, so I'm going to cut right on the edges of those pencil lines. If your saw is a little wonky, steer clear of them just a little bit, and you can come back in and clean them up with a hand plane afterwards. After that, I'll turn the leg 90 degrees, do the next set of layout lines, and come back and cut those. Some people like to keep that wedge that you get from that first set of lines to shim the piece back up level. I don't worry about it in the case of these farm table legs since they're kind of rustic to start with, but in other situations, you want to keep that wedge, masking tape it to the bottom, and then make your cut, and that'll keep the exit line nice and square to that pencil line you drew. Now, depending on the type of joinery that you are using in your project, at this point you may be done. For example, if you're doing pocket hole screws, all you'll need to do is drill the pocket holes in the aprons and then screw the aprons to the legs. In other cases, such as a mortise and tenon, which is what I'll be demonstrating, you'll need to cut those mortises in the legs. There's all different ways to go about this: routers, drill presses, hollow chisel mortisers, and all kinds of fancy jigs, but I use the hollow chisel mortiser. I've also demonstrated how to do it with a drill press, Forstner bit, and then squaring it out in the end with a chisel. The hollow chisel mortiser is basically a drill press, but it's dedicated to cutting mortises. It has a square chisel in it that's hollow with an auger style bit in its center. The bit drills just ahead of that hollow chisel, and then the chisel itself squares out the corners. The leg will ride across the fence, and you'll make as many cuts as you need to determine the length of the mortise. The thickness of the mortise, or its width, is determined by the size chisel that you put in there, and they come in various sizes. Here's a closer look at the machine. You can see the leg will sit here up against the fence. Here's the hollow chisel and the auger style bit in the middle. I've got pencil lines on the fence that correspond to different legs that I make, and so all I need to do is place my leg up onto the table, slide it down to the corresponding pencil mark, and then pull the lever, which will plunge and cut out a hole. Then I work my way across until I get to the other pencil mark. And then once I'm done with one mortise, I flip the leg and cut the other side. Well, that wraps up all the steps that I use in making my farm table legs. To recap what we did, we started out with a glued up blank of 2x6s, cut it down to a 4x4 dimension on the bandsaw, squared it up on one end, cut it to length. Then we did layout marks and cut the tapers on the bandsaw. We wrapped up the whole process cutting the mortises on my hollow chisel mortiser. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see the entire process of making a farm table, you can click the inset video after this clip. And if you'd like to see more of the techniques I use in creating my furniture, let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Click the video playing on the screen now to see a 10-foot long farm table being built. And if you're not already a subscriber, click the big red button on the screen now and you'll get updates when I post future videos.